My co-host, the chicks, we have two. A friend gave us to be buddies because only one of ours hatched. And I figured I would have chicks co-host, partially because they're just really cute, but also because what else do US presidents have in common other than hot chicks? Am I right? Okay, hopefully people can take that joke. Today we're talking about how Biden has basically pardoned everybody, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people of interest. The New York Times headline is Biden pardons 5 members of his family in final minutes in office. Mr. Biden emphasized he did not believe his family did anything wrong, but he feared political attacks by Donald J. Trump. Also, he pardoned Fauci, Cheney, and General Milley and some other people on the January 6th committee. Trump slams Biden for pardoning Fauci. These are all my email addresses in case people were wondering. Send me an email. Trump slams Biden for pardoning Fauci, Milley, and Jan 6 committee staffers in final hours of presidency. Disgraceful. This is the New York Post. What I found interesting about all this is that some media outlets are far more concerned about this than others. Of course, the New York Post tends to lean right, so they have the concern over these pardons, which are somewhat historic in nature. Normally, as we'll see in the AP, who did actually touch on this, normally you pardon somebody who's already committed a crime. In this particular case, these were preemptive pardons. So these are pardons for people who have not yet been charged with a crime. Now, if you read the New York Times, they make sense of this by just saying what Biden said, which is, quote, my family has been subjected to unrelenting attacks and threats motivated solely by a desire to hurt me, the worst kind of partisan politics. Unfortunately, I have no reason to believe these attacks will end. We know that he already pardoned Hunter Biden, his son. These pardons now include his brother James, his let's see here, Sarah Jones Biden, James's wife, Valerie Biden Owens, Mr. Biden's sister, John T. Owens, Mrs. Owens' husband, and Francis Biden, Mr. Biden's brother. And the New York Times kind of just takes that one and runs with it. It says that they announced the pardons less than 20 minutes left in his presidency, but didn't really touch on the precedent that this could set. So like the pardons, it says, were a remarkable coda to his 50-year political career. And they say it underscores the mistrust and anger the president feels about Mr. Trump, the man who preceded and will succeed him in office. Biden repeatedly warned that Trump was a threat to democracy, that he believed in the rule of law, was confident in the stability of the institutions. The pardons threatened to challenge that assertion. So, they're saying, well, he says all this stuff about the threat Trump has to democracy, and like these pardons, maybe they're calling into question that. Maybe they're kind of calling into question whether that's really true. I mean, maybe he's overusing his power. So then they put Biden's explanation and other people and another statement from the president and who else he pardoned. But they don't really go into what the AP says, which is like, okay, what does this mean for the future? I mean, this is something that we haven't talked about quite a bit related to this presidency when it comes to censorship. Like there was, wide sweeping censorship over the last few years under this presidency. And there are a lot of journalists who still believe that was the right thing to do, that there was just rampant misinformation. Now with Trump in office, it's going to get worse, that finally there was this crackdown, fact checkers. We'll talk in a second about how, I know a journalist, for instance, a former journalist, very vocal on social media, talking about how, she's going to be one of the people protesting Meta. She's getting off Meta for the time being because she's going to protest how they got rid of their fact checkers. And now, she as a journalist, she's against misinformation and disinformation. And it's just going to be rampant now under Trump. And this is completely crazy that people still believe this. I genuinely, I must live in a different universe. I don't know how. I've seen that this is clearly not the case, that the fact checkers, we know this. Those of you watching that, the fact checking was not really about fact checking at all. So I want to show you what the AP actually said, which was, impressive. They just that they even mentioned the concern here, what this means for these preemptive pardons. And before we do that, don't forget greenpasture.org, greenpasture.org. get yourself some fermented cod liver butter oil. Use promo code Allison, 1L Allison at checkout. What we have been taking, though they have many great products, we have been taking the fermented cod liver oil and concentrated butter oil blend for over a decade. It considerably helped my struggle with cavities. I used to get cavities all the time. When I went to the dentist, they would say, okay, we got fill another tooth, even though I'd just been there 6 months before. It's funny because after I started taking this product, a few years in, I one time went 3 years without going to the dentist. I just got really busy, and I'd moved to Seattle and I didn't have a dentist. And so whatever, I go in and I thought for sure they're going to find cavities because it's been 3 years since I've been to the dentist. Sure enough, no cavities. I was shocked because I used to go to the dentist all the time. Anyway, greenpasture.org, promo code Allison. And we do the cinnamon tegel flavor. We really like that. It's formulated the way that Dr. Weston A. Price, the biological dentist, has become quite famous for nutrition and how it affects our health. He saw cavities in his patients, post-industrialized food. They're all eating food now. He's turn of the century, into the 20th century, and saw how diets were really altering his patients' dental health. So anyway, this is kind of the formulation he came up with. Greenpasture.org, promo code Allison. Going back to the chick cam. Don't forget, you can see our off-gridish adventures if you would like to follow us over on our Off-Gridish Living channel. We just have a video up here about our baby goat that was just born. So Off-Gridish Living is where you can find us, and you can see all kinds of chick videos there. I want to go back to the AP because, as I was promising, the media did in some cases pick up on the precedent that sets Biden pardons Fauci, Milley, and the January 6th committee in an effort to guard against revenge by Trump. And if you scroll down a few paragraphs, this is how they say it. Okay, so the pardons have been subject of heated debate because, quote, it's customary for president to grant clemency at the end of his term, but those acts are of mercy, usually offered to Americans who have been convicted of crimes. And Biden, a Democrat, has used the power in the broadest and most untested way possible to pardon those who have not even been investigated. His decision lays the groundwork for an even more expansive use of pardons by Trump, a Republican, and future presidents. I almost fell out of my chair when I read that because I was like, wow, okay, they are actually paying attention. Because like, for instance, with the way that the government was manipulating speech during COVID, I didn't see a whole lot of concern like, oh gosh, what if Trump gets in office and then he has his people making the rounds on YouTube and Facebook and all these places and wanting to crack down. So I was like, I never really saw that. It was just like, no, we have to do this to stop misinformation. I'm like, oh, okay. And then here they go on to say that while the Supreme Court last year ruled that presidents enjoy broad immunity from prosecution for what could be considered official acts, the president's aides and allies enjoy no such shield. There is concern that future presidents could use the promise of a blanket pardon to encourage allies to take actions they might otherwise resist for fear of running afoul of the law. Wow. Okay. So yes, this is all an interesting point to make. Thank you that the AP actually looks at that. Like I said, there have been many, many circumstances over the last few years where precedent has not been of much concern. I think in most cases, they kind of seem to be buying this whole like Trump is just vengeful and he would be the one breaking the law, coming after these poor people like Liz Cheney and Dr. Fauci and Milley. That he would be the one that's the aggressor, attacking democracy by targeting them, versus it being that these people had done anything wrong. And Biden said, look, he's just trying to save their reputations and he's trying to save their pocketbooks because they would have to go through litigation. And so he's just doing this to just do what's right, to keep them from being unfairly and unduly targeted. I think that's a load of crud. But I don't know. I also think that what's interesting about this is something I learned during COVID. It didn't create a situation where the executive branch has some perhaps concerning levels of power. it just used what was already there. And so I think when we see this, it's like, wow, the takeaway could just be that Biden is unnaturally authoritative or authoritarian, I guess, when it comes to using this pardon power. But, with the lockdowns and everything else that happened during COVID, I think one of the things I learned from interviewing people was not to walk away saying, "Wow, look at this governor or this presidential administration doing this." It was to walk away saying, "Wow, these powers already existed. They just used them." And it was really quite an education for me to see like how easily our civil liberties can be taken away. That was one of my big takeaways. So if I get taken off the internet and you still want to get a hold of me, as things progress online, you can send me mail, P.O. Box 3355, Denellen, Florida 34432. Love getting the notes of encouragement. We've gotten some C's from people, some cards, some generous donations. Really, really appreciate it. The producers, my kids, they open the packages on the way home. It is absolutely a joy for them to do that. They tell everybody at the post office what they're doing, and it's just so fun. So please keep it kid friendly, and love hearing from everybody. P.O. Box 3355, Denellen, Florida 34432. You can also support me on Locals. AllisonMorrow.locals.com is a great way to support the show. We have the live chat going on right now. And so anyway, I don't play for a team. I should say that up front if you're new to the channel. I know I actually got a bunch of new subscribers after the Amos Miller case. And I don't really play for a team other than Team Chick, Team Farm. So if you like food and farming, like I said, then just keep me in your video log, because we do a lot of that stuff. Like I said, go to Off British Living. Okay, and don't forget, you can also support the show over at AllisonWinePromo.com. We got some new signups, so it's been very exciting to see new members over at the wine club. You get 6 bottles of wine that you cannot get really anywhere else. I mean, I honestly don't know where you can get these bottles. They're so limited in edition. They're like a couple hundred bottles come from these tiny vineyards that were selected specifically for what I like about food and drinks, like no artificial dyes and flavorings, the traditional winemaking techniques, so like natural fermentation processes, vineyards that have been around for hundreds of years in some cases, and some that are some of the highest vineyards in the entire world, places that are so remote. There's just very, very little pesticide use, and they're just very clean products, and they taste great. They taste great. They're great for gifts. If you're not a wine drinker, you just want to have a shipment that comes every few months, and then you always have a great bottle of wine to bring your friends, or your frenemies, whatever, then go to AllisonWinePromo.com. You will not be disappointed. I have a bottle right here to show you. Okay. I don't drink during the show. It's just a prop. I was surprised that my video about Amos Miller has almost 100,000 views. I didn't think I would ever see that ever again. So that's crazy. I maybe there's a future for me on YouTube, but I'm glad to be on Locals and Rumble and Rockfin. One last thing, I am suing the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. They censored me during COVID. They told me that I could not keep my job if I kept interviewing people like that went against the Fauci narrative. And so I refused, and I was fired from my job. That's how we ended up moving to Florida. And anyway, if you want to support the lawsuit, which is underway, you can go to givesendgo.com/Allison free speech fight. And I just end this by saying, I do know firsthand the effect of the Fauci or the Cheney or the Milley machine, I guess, even if it's far deeper than just those people and they were just kind of the face of this. But these were people who over the last few years rebranded free speech as something very scary for Americans. And I think that is such an unfortunate legacy for them. It is so deeply evil to uh, to beat the drum of freedom as scary. And I think that to me is their legacy. I mean, it's what made them all very similar, whether they're talking about January 6th or they're talking about war or they're talking about medicine. These were people who were very concerned about speech. And I'm not saying like what happened on January 6th, like for Cheney, for instance, like that was free speech, just busting into the Capitol and everything. But I'm saying that the even just talking about it, remember, like we couldn't even talk about what happened. We couldn't have different opinions about January 6th. So even if you're somebody who was very concerned about January 6th, you really believed that it was an insurrection, which I do not believe. We were not allowed to even we weren't allowed to question that. I mean, there was concern that if you were like, there's community guidelines that say that we can't downplay stuff like, domestic terrorism or, security threats. And so, like, that's why this whole Russia Ukraine thing, I mean, that came after the whole Russia Ukraine censorship issue. People are getting ripped offline for that, for like downplaying Russia. Russia's, well, the mainstream narrative was Russia's aggression. So if you were somebody who felt like there was a different way to see it, and that's the legacy of Fauci and Cheney and Milley and all these other people that just got pardoned. What was far worse for this country than what they did specifically, like I said, the January 6th committee or the CDC's propaganda that they, Fauci ran cover for them, and by making it right that we had these restrictions and these terrible testing techniques and everything. Far worse was their legacy for our ability to question them. And that's something that you couldn't really pardon them for, because it's not really technically a crime, I guess, to just go out and say, I mean, they have free speech too. They have the right to go out and say free speech is dangerous. But that was the legacy that these people left. And so whatever they're being pardoned for, um the real danger, the real evil that they spread was something that they're not being pardoned for, and that is that they taught Americans that speaking is scary. And journalists bought that too, and journalists beat that drum too. And it will take a long time, if ever, to regain our ground in that regard. It will take a very, very long time.